Welcome to the Arts Lunch at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. I'm Jennifer Oz Freeman. I'm the Associate Professor and Program Director of Theology and Arts at United, and very excited to have with us Debra Band to talk about, I'm just going to learn my name, to talk about her book, Kohelet, which includes commentary by Menachem Fish and is currently on display at United in the gallery here. Debra, as we'll see, is really talented and hardworking with multiple projects at the same time. Artist, painter, and calligrapher of Hebrew and English. And in addition to the work Kohelet, has also made works of the Song of Songs, Debra, and I'm looking at your book title list here, Arise, Arise, Debra, Ruth, and Hannah, and then the Kabbalah Shabbat, the Grand Unification. And we'll hear more, I think, about some upcoming works too. So without further ado, welcome, Debra, and I'll let you share your screen.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Okay, let me just do the magic with PowerPoint. Actually, let me share first. Sorry. PowerPoint slideshow. Why is this not? Okay, very nice. Lovely. Why? Let me make that go away. Wonderful. It's lovely. I'm so delighted to be with you this afternoon and grateful to Jennifer for inviting.
Oh, sorry, Debra, hold on. It's not actually showing.
Oh, really? It didn't, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. I hit share.
There you go.
Very, very good. Okay.
Yep.
Can you guys see the chaos on my screen?
You can see the chaos, and yeah, and then if you just do the whatever slideshow button you need to hit.
Right.
Yeah.
Play from start. Lovely. That work?
Yeah, that's it.
Great. Okay, wonderful. So I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon. Grateful to Jennifer for inviting me and organizing this. And I hope you guys are all enjoying the exhibit. Let me begin by giving you the backstory to this exhibit and book. It began with a family tragedy, and I've been in conversation with this philosopher and teacher ever since. My first conversation with Kohelet was triggered by the shock of the sudden death by traffic accident of a much beloved stepbrother on the eve of Yom Kippur, a really difficult moment in the Jewish calendar when I was 31. As I arrived home from synagogue services late that night, I heard my mother's voice on my answering machine, shocking in of itself, since as an observant Jew, she never touched electronics on a festival. I grabbed the phone and heard her crying that Johnny was in hospital dying, and I managed to arrive home in Montreal in time for the funeral and entered a maelstrom of shock and grief that I'd never witnessed before. One night soon after, for reasons that I cannot remember, I picked up Kohelet in my parents' library and spent the rest of the evening pacing their foyer, glued to this hitherto remote book. Before that, I dutifully followed the annual synagogue chanting of Kohelet on Sukkot, but never paid much attention to it. It just felt very remote. But that night, the phrase, "Oh, he understands how random, how arbitrary death can be," reverberated in my head and never faded. I'd only just begun my work in Hebrew illuminated manuscripts, but my challenge to explore Kohelet took hold that evening. I made a couple of false starts at it, but knew that Kohelet was saying something way more than I was understanding. It was about 25 years until a Shabbat dinner at Menachem's and his wife Hannah's home during a meet the family trip to Israel shortly after my second husband's and my wedding. When Menachem casually asked me about my plans for my next project, I shook my head and replied that, I really wanted to work on Kohelet, but I'd wandered into a fog bank each time I tried. "Oh, I've written on Kohelet. Let me send you the article," he offered. So the following week, I downloaded and devoured it, and lo, light suddenly pierced the mists. Menachem adventurously agreed to discuss a joint project, although he was more than slightly puzzled about how one might go about visualizing this entirely abstract text, but that's my job. Now, you might well ask, well, very nice, but what is the point of this archaic medium altogether now in the era of never mind printing, but the internet and AI? Let me answer this today by sharing with you the ways that I approach the creation of modern biblical illuminated manuscripts, and then showing you some of the 60 illuminations themselves. You'll see how an illuminated manuscript can do far more than enhance the aesthetics and emotions of readers' experience, but actually interpret and amplify the subtleties of the text, its relationship to our greater world, in a coherent visual midrash. Here, a leisurely contemplative gaze at its imagery brings to human level complex ideas about Kohelet's intent, and detects the reverberations of this odd but vital text across not only the Jewish culture that produced, protected, and cherished it, but also across surrounding Western civilization. Now, a painting or a sculpture, for that matter, can communicate dozens of ideas instantly, and an illumination fuses our words and images, tying us to 2 millennia of our visual and intellectual cultures beautifully. This 1434 painting is from the hand of an artist who came out of the tradition of illuminated manuscripts and who has taught me almost everything I know about building the meaning of a painting. I work daily under a reproduction, and a visit with it in the National Gallery in London has been just about my first stop on even the briefest trip there. The religious and ethical value of every single item you see here adds up to a detailed moral and ethical marriage contract between 2 15th century young people, not simply a fusion of 2 Florentine banking families. Just a few examples. The little dog represents fidelity, the sabbats, the clogs, protection from the elements, this single candle glowing in the chandelier, the light of Jesus, and under the mirror, the artist witnessed Jan van Eyck was here. Now, obviously, since I work within Jewish tradition, my imagery is entirely different from that of 15th century Christianity. Mine is based in other related biblical texts, colorful exegesis from many rabbinic sources, and modern academic Bible studies, and many avenues of Western thought and science. However, unlike in the Christian tradition, I've needed to develop most of this iconographic vocabulary myself. Jewish cultures, whether Eastern or Western, have very rich and ancient traditions of visual art, but the imagery has tended to be narrative or sheerly decorative, rather than expressive of abstract ideas. The second commandment, prohibition on portraying God, has something to do with this, but really not very much, since Jewish art is full of human imagery. With a few famous exceptions, the prohibition is really related only to envisioning the divine, and that is taken very seriously, as I do as well. My sense is that the lack of abstract idea in Jewish visual art, whereas our literature is full of highly visual, abstract metaphor, is largely a matter of the generally high level of literacy among historical Jewish audiences. Didactic imagery was just simply of less importance. There are a few exceptions to this absence, but really only a few. Nowadays, however, as our general surrounding Western culture, which is so heavily influenced by the internet, becomes ever more visual, our minds and eyes have changed. One of my challenges over 3 decades has been to develop a modern Jewish iconographic vocabulary capable of teasing out abstract concepts in visual form, reflecting both thought native not only to expressly Jewish tradition, but also the cultural and scientific worlds within which we live. Following the lead of Van Eyck, as analyzed by Erwin Panofsky, I create disguised symbolism in a scene that usually makes logical sense, all explained in commentaries in the book. These symbolic images aren't simply plastered around the composition to be read individually, but work together to create a coherent interpretation of the work, melding classical readings with reflections from my cultural surround as a 20th, 21st century Western woman. Now, how do I construct my visual midrash? Moshe Halbertal has described Jewish culture as a text-centered community. And my own interpretive work is nothing if not text-centered. Each project begins with some years studying the chosen text, in this case Kohelet, along with its rabbinic commentaries and modern academic Bible studies. There are also regular discussions with my collaborators. Menachem and I work together by Zoom throughout the whole thing. I begin each painting by writing, and as I consider each passage, many more associations spring to mind, and I develop a mental picture of where I want to go. I rarely sketch these anymore. The layout happens in my mind, and then I set to work, laying out text and micrography first, proofing, and then painting in gouache and finally gilding. I usually include some element of paper cutting, another medium traditional to the Jewish manuscript arts, in my books. But here in this book, I've only used it in the flyleaves. Since one always sees a two-page spread in a book, I paint both facing illuminations together. Now here, I base my visual midrash of Kohelet that runs through 60 paintings on my cousin collaborator Menachem's Hevel premise. Now, Hevel. The key word in Kohelet's writings, a constant refrain, is that all is Hevel. Now, Hevel literally means mist or vapor, not vanity, as the King James translators and the Vulgate before that metaphorically put it. There were ways in which that term worked then, but it doesn't anymore. Some modern, another translation that's commonly used is futility, like even the Jewish Publication Society used that. But life is emphatically not nothing. It's not vain. Life is real and precious, but like mist, you can't hold it in your hand. It's going to float away. The human lifespan is short, and not only we, but all our discrete deeds are transient. Nothing lasts forever. And separated as we are from the divine, we cannot possibly fathom God's expectations of us, although we know, certainly in Jewish tradition, that we ultimately face divine judgment. This is the Hevel premise that Menachem realized pervades Kohelet, and it turns the book from a series of rather nihilistic and disconnected musings into a carefully composed philosophical exploration of how to find a life of value despite our transience. Let me show you how this visual midrash of Kohelet works. Now you see here a painting of the Alhambra on its ridge in Granada. The micrographic border surrounding the painting presents roughly the first third of the book. You'll see the remainder in the next slide. So why the Alhambra? This corresponds directly to Menachem's Hevel premise. Our grandest, most exquisite monuments are ephemeral, just as are our lives and endeavors. And of course, Kohelet does don the cloak of the great King Solomon, kind of an avatar, as he analyzes the human condition. So in the paintings ahead, I compare human life and deeds, labors, as Kohelet would say, to a grand and gorgeous palace full of lives bursting with action and conversation, beauty and tragedy. Yet even this grandeur will crumble in time. The palace metaphor draws upon a tradition common in Midrash, comparing the heavens to a palace and the human world to a garden or an orchard. I extend the metaphor to human life and deeds. And what grander palace than the Alhambra, the wondrously beautiful medieval palace and gardens of the Muslim Nasrid rulers of Granada. The Alhambra also hosted much of the vibrant, poetry-filled court life of the medieval Spanish or Sephardic community. And yet, for all its glory, all the almost audible ghosts of the glittering and powerful people who strode its expanses, if you look into the corners of its mosaic-encrusted walls, if you look at the stonework lining its garden paths, you see that even this massive glory crumbles slowly into the red dust from which it arose. The golden rim of this painting alludes to the golden bowl in the 12th chapter, not yet cracked here, and haunts the entire manuscript. So while the Alhambra provides the setting and the central metaphor, I flesh out the sense of the fragile and fugitive beauty of human experience with iconography drawn from related biblical and other Jewish texts, from archaeology, from the natural world, science, and far more modern icons relating to issues that Kohelet explores. I include poetry and prose not only from the Hebrew Bible, but from across Western civilization to help reveal the enduring reality of Kohelet's thought across millennia and landscapes far from his own. Now, an area of mist penetrates every painting, always reminding us of the ephemerality of all human deeds. I introduce all of these to conjure up a visual midrash, probing Kohelet's struggle to understand the workings of the universe, to find wisdom, that is what God demands of us, despite our transience and vantage point down here under the sun. On the Hebrew page here, the philosopher's eye, Menachem's, peers through the initial letter. The plain clay jar spilling the jewels that tumble down around the words on the left describe in a midrash, I'm sorry, that's on the right, quoted for each of the books attributed to Solomon, that wise king's unsealing of the wisdom of Torah. The rabbis compare the Torah to a sealed jar full of jewels, but only when it's opened and spilled can the riches be found. This was Solomon when he composed Kohelet. Now, I'll leave you to explore the meaning of the English painting in the book and in the exhibit. The philosopher compares the immutable cycle of life to the daily journey of the sun and to the water cycle, all three, at least until recently, beyond the reach of human will and action. The mosaic repeats its own complex, man-made pattern endlessly in colors that echo the sea, sky, sunlight, and forests. Outside, ephemeral mist, Hevel, rises from the gardens below into the clouds, only to fall to land and sea as rain. The cloud of micrographic text in the Hebrew illumination includes passages of the 11th century Spanish Jewish philosopher and poet Solomon ibn Gabirol's Neoplatonic philosophical tract in verse, The Royal Crown. He incidentally lived and worked in the Alhambra for some time, although granted in an earlier, less grand incarnation. The first passage in the micrography ponders our inability to comprehend God's eternity. The second laments the clouds of human imperfection that obscure humanity's view of divine wisdom, which is likened here to light. Now, gazing from his high tower, the omnipotent ruler struggles to accept that he cannot rise from under the sun to perceive divine wisdom. He despairs of the ephemerality of even his rich and powerful life. The Hebrew word ani, I, rests upon a regal carpet, while the glittering gold between the lines fit for royal manuscript seem to ridicule the earth-bound philosopher's inability to find heavenly wisdom. The English pronoun I rests upon a clay bulla of the Judean royal seal. The balustrade upon which he rests is from the ruins of the Judean palace at Ramat Rachel, hinting at the monumental palace that Kohelet's Solomon avatar inhabits. We see a Hubble Space Telescope image of the ultra-deep field of space in the sky there, which I've long used to symbolize God's invisible but all-suffusing presence, and in this book in particular, to allude to how every particle of our world cycles endlessly through the stars. Can one find wisdom by indulging in luxury? Kohelet's sensual pleasure and pride in his material achievements are clouded by his realization that all his luxuries evaporate. In the Hebrew illumination, Kohelet gazes upon his irrigated orchards and vineyards. This Persian period philosopher would already associate water flowing in this arid land with the wisdom of Torah, a ubiquitous metaphor found throughout the prophets and writings. At right, the cherry branches, emblematic of the seat of American power in Washington, D.C., where these illuminations were painted, progressed through their annual cycle, reminding him of the passing of generations. Despite Kohelet's pride in all the beauty that he's amassed, the drifting fog reminds him of the ephemerality of all his wealth here under the sun. By the latter part of the second chapter, as Menachem describes, the philosopher king has plunged into despair as he realizes that there is no way for even the wisest, most powerful of humans to reach up to grasp divine wisdom, that all his riches and accomplishments will eventually evaporate. Vanished are the luxuriant views of vineyards and orchards. Instead, angrily broken jewelry, a golden chain and a precious, already then antique, string of carnelian beads that he might have given his wife or lover, lie broken amid his words. And the calligraphy of the very words pales and twists and burns with his misery. Now, just a few words about these paintings of perhaps the most beloved part of Kohelet that everyone certainly of a certain age knows. At right, with the first verse of the chapter, the philosopher king gazes into a garden pond, again alluding to the golden bowl of chapter 12. And no, it's not yet cracked. Kohelet begins to find comfort, though, in human limitations on wisdom, as he meditates further on how every situation in life has its moment, even if that moment is unknowable to any but God. He perceives life as a stream, its beginning and end obscure, always subject to sudden turbulence. The little mosaic at the top of the left-hand page bears a fragment of the musical notation of what else but Pete Seeger's famous 1965 song setting of the poem Turn, Turn, Turn. And now for something completely different. Kohelet turns to consider the foolishness of oppressors and plutocrats in the face of both human and divine authority. The Hebrew illumination presents the ancient flail and sword, while the English illumination begins with a more modern tool of oppression, and coins spill everywhere. Again, the starlit heavens of the Hubble image. Again, divine intent obscured from human view by clouds of mist. Kohelet warns his students to avoid hazardous behavior and instead pursue wise, careful self-conduct. He contrasts two metaphorical images of women current in his day to sketch the tug-of-war between wisdom and foolishness. Now, this is often assumed to be a bit of misogyny, but I would suggest that the gendered language itself argues against so literal a reading. Chokhmah, wisdom, the object of Kohelet's search, is a feminine word in Hebrew. Throughout the book of Proverbs, which is roughly contemporary with Kohelet, wisdom is characterized as a woman, a teacher and model for all humankind. Indeed, Proverbs ends with a famous paean to the wise and capable mother, homemaker, and businesswoman, all faces of Lady Wisdom. Conversely, Kohelet warns of the dangers of temptation by reckless, illicit women, characterized in Proverbs 9:13 by the feminine gender ksilut, of the same word ksil, fool, that Kohelet continually applies to his negative role model. At left, on the page at left, two micrographic texts contrast the two symbolic women. The wise woman at far right, in blue, gathers her fruit, household keys dangling from her waist. She is composed of that paean I mentioned, a woman of valor, and along with verses from Proverbs 9, all praising Lady Wisdom. At the left of that painting, A dancing woman, such as one might have seen at evening entertainments in the Alhambra, rattles a tambourine. Now, she is compared of the aria Libiamo in the first act of Verdi's La Traviata, the interchange between the courtesan Violetta and her young about-to-be lover Alfredo Germond. In contrast to the wise and prudent woman across the stage, these soon-to-be lovers sing to each other about how life is all about embracing the pleasure of the moment. Now, this is a good place to show you another image that appears here and, in fact, on every painting. You can see a small honeybee on each. There's a blow up here. My Hebrew name, Debra, is the Hebrew word for honeybee. And although I do indeed keep bees nowadays, in fact, just finished harvesting the year's honey, since long before that, placing a bee in each painting has been my play on the medieval colophon identifying a scribe. Here, Kohelet has moved on to consider the difficulties of a person of integrity serving a corrupt ruler. The illuminations offer cautionary images for both the arrogant ruler and the honest courtier. We see a painting of a marble statue of justice pulling down her blindfold and winking. In contrast, the bordering calligraphy offers the very passage, "Justice, justice you shall pursue," from Deuteronomy 16, that famously requires the ruler to pursue honest and even-handed justice for all people. The English text begins with a painting that shows a crown lying in a gutter, a cautionary tale inspired by both Napoleon's remark about the crown of France lying in the gutter, waiting to be picked up with the tip of a sword, and General George Patton's observation that at Roman generals' triumph parades, a slave stood behind the conqueror holding a golden crown and whispering in his ear that all glory is fleeting. The decorative text bordering the English page illustrates the dangers attendant upon the honest courtier, with Cordelia's speech from the beginning of King Lear. And finally, Kohelet arrives at the answer to his search for wisdom. His royal avatar gazes out at his orderly farmland and catches sight of a small, very small here, but wise farmer working the land, dividing into areas for different treatment. Some wither and some flourish. Cast thy bread upon the waters, he says, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, even to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. So take your chances, make your contingency plans. Some plans will go awry, but some will flourish. This is the key to survival, to fulfillment in all your labors, and to wisdom in human life. As he muses, his hand rests beside his beloved's, while the olives symbolize both his nobility and his growing family, and the pomegranate branch their fruitfulness, and the bottle of wine his sanctification of God and his joy. Kohelet now has found the elusive secret to a meaningful life beneath the unknowable heavens. We are nearing the end of Kohelet's reflections, the gentle and poetic ode to death. The Talmudic motto, "Know before whom you stand," that crowns the grand portal to this palace. Rather, it crowns the grand portal to this palace, just as it's crowned the Holy Ark in synagogues across the centuries. All of the diverse and busy lives lived in this palace, whether child or adult, laborer or scholar or aristocrat, all paths lead away from the sunlit courtyard toward shadow, oblivion, and certain divine judgment. We find in the foreground a fragile elderly laborer lugging a basket of grapes destined for a grape table, pregnant women celebrating each other's joys, children and aristocrats, and then in the distance, an old man hobbles into the inescapable misty darkness at the end of the grand halls. Even the solid stone palace itself is ephemeral. The golden bowl of the courtyard fountain not only sprays, but also leaks the water that's essential to human life. Weeds have invaded the meticulously laid courtyard tiles, and the intricate mosaics have begun to crumble. The almond tree is heavy with fragrant white blossoms, but that's likely a contemporary idiom for the white hair and beard of old age. Nothing in the palace of human existence, even in this grandest of palaces, lasts forever. Then what does last forever if not human accomplishment? Only God. And Kohelet begins his paean to the end of human life under the sun by warning us to live constantly aware of the inevitability of divine judgment of our personal actions. The courtyard of his palace is filled with exhortations to live mindful of divine law. The pomegranate tree reminds the courtiers of fertility. We see pregnant women and the fruits of all of humankind's labors, but its many seeds also symbolize the 613 commandments. Midrashic associations with a pink lily at its root remind them of the value of the 10 Commandments in the corrupt human world, and the thorny rose climbing its trunk recalls the humility of the burning bush. The grass that springs up between the courtyard tiles suggests the warning that occurs throughout biblical texts that sinners will vanish like dry grass. Think of Psalm 90. As throughout Jewish lore, the water that sprays from the fountain also symbolizes the necessity of Torah to humankind throughout our lives under the sun. Far beneath the heavens, night falls over the palace of the philosopher king. The golden bowl framing the scene has finally cracked. Now, shortly before painting these, I happened upon a book of poetry reflecting on Kohelet, composed by the first of the two 11th century Jewish grand viziers who ruled in Granada. This was Samuel the Nagid. 44 of its roughly 120 poems are worked into the micrography here. One beautiful poem surrounds the text page, expressing the poet's determination to pursue life despite its transience. Soul opens inside you on beauty and then tells you to seek in the world and ignore its flaws. Heart says, you'll live forever, and death, as it speaks, grasps you with claws. Kohelet's last words rest within fig branches that are cycling through the seasons. Throughout Jewish lore, figs embody many qualities of Israel, humankind, and the world. Here, they hint at the birth and passing of generations and the goodness of divine law. The oak branch bears the acorns that are the oak's future. The image alludes to Israel's strength to endure despite the passing of every individual, of even the Davidic kingdom itself. Isaiah prophesied that Israel would be reborn after conquest like the terebinth and the oak, of which stumps are left even when they are felled. Its stump shall be a holy seed. Like the oak seed and regenerating stump, long after his own death, Kohelet's words continue to offer humankind guidance toward a realistic yet meaningful life. So, thank you very much, and let's talk.
Thank you, Debra, for sharing that really complex and profound work. And so we have plenty of time for conversation and questions, and I know that there will be some responses from those gathered here. So open the floor.
Did everyone understand? I took this for granted and I shouldn't have done. Do people understand the word midrash when I use it? I should have defined it. Yes, good. Okay, very good.
Holly, you're muted if you said anything there. Sorry.
All I said was hard to define.
Lovely. So, any questions about materials, methods, the disguise symbolism idea?
I can ask a question while folks are ruminating. I mean, we have a couple of questions, but I guess I remember when I first encountered your book in this project, just being really kind of struck by Menachem's interpretation, because you do, I mean, it's just like such a, even people who know like nothing about scripture know that, like, have heard, like, because of the song and so, you know, I mean, like, have some kind of idea of like this idea of vanity being associated, or futility, I think, so I think use that word too. So I was, one of the most impactful things for me about the project, besides, you know, of course, your beautiful calligraphy and especially the micrography and borders and things, was kind of like a reframing of the very central message of
Yes,
which goes from being kind of like despair to
right.
actually hopefulness, or a kind of immediacy maybe, or something like that.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really looked around. This coming from, you know, an art historian and not a Bible scholar, so maybe
Sure.
that's
Menachem talks about Kohelet ending in joy.
yeah.
I think that's going a bit far, but what it does for me is serenity. You know, he understands that, yes, there is a way of finding peace with yourself in this world. You know, there are things you can't control. Um, there are things you can't control. Terrible things can happen, but also good things are going to happen.
Yeah.
You just can't know when and how. It's not at all discounting the notion of a providential God. It's just that, and we can pray, but we cannot know when God is going to choose to take whatever action.
Mhm.
And but you can, by doing your best to plan for things, being conscious that there is going to be judgment, that you can have a degree of serenity that you're doing what you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it goes from, it's not at all that actions are meaningless, or something like
Exactly,
that.
not at all. That translation, it again, there were ways that it worked, even literally in the 17th century, quite apart from the metaphorical understanding. But that doesn't work anymore. That meaning has gone. And so to say that everything is vain or futile, it's just beside the point. That's not what he's saying. It's real, but it floats away.
If I can, or Molly, I don't know if you had a response to that.
Deborah, how do you understand the interface between God's agency and human agency?
The interface. Oh, that's a big question. Well, we hope that we have a measure of the wisdom from God. We hope we have a measure of it. But we never know, and we know we're not God.
Amen.
But we also know that we all, you know, those of us with faith know that God can work through us too. And so here, I hope I'm talking sense and not gibberish.
You are.
Thank you. So we hope we're doing what we ought to be doing. You know, this is the search, and I think one of the things Kohelet talks about, one of the things that Kohelet talks about is finding the serenity and understanding you're doing what you ought to be doing. In knowing that divine agency, I'm not going to argue with it, but that isn't always obvious unless you accept that God is which we do. You know, God is everywhere, God is everything, everything is happening in one way or another because of God. And then you get into all the problems of evil in the universe.
Yeah.
So I've actually just, well, at the same time I was working on this, I was working on a project with a very celebrated scholar of Jewish mysticism, Arthur Green, and an astrophysicist at Harvard, on an annotated translation and scientific commentary and illuminations of a work of classical Kabbalah from the early 16th century, which deeply explores the question of evil in the world. And it's very complicated, but this guy has it that, or this tradition has it, that evil stems from division, and division stems from the second day of creation. It's innate in existence. So, but you're always so divine agency is there, but so is human, and we hope there's a relationship.
Exactly, and that's the hardest theological question, is the interface between the two.
Sure.
Thank you for thinking with me about it.
Thank you for that. Such a challenging question.
That makes me, if I may, want to call on my colleague, Dr. Demian Wheeler, interim dean at United, who I know is working on a big project related to sin and evil and suffering, and has been, he's also no Bible scholar, but has been dabbling in Kohelet and you said Lamentations. Demi, I'm curious, like, what you think about this, what your response is to, for example, Menachem's translation, and I know how important the arts are to you as well. Of course, you could respond to that part, but yeah, what do you think about all this?
Well, thank you, Deborah. Let me first say that we've really enjoyed, every day when I come into the office, just kind of making my way down the various pieces and panels hanging on our wall. I don't have you seen actually how Cheryl and Jennifer set that up?
Yes, Jennifer sent me some photos.
It's
It's
exquisite.
beautiful. It's come out really beautifully.
So we've been really enjoying, and I'm currently working on a project about the problem of suffering.
Right.
And so I've spent a little bit of time looking at the Book of Lamentations over the last few months specifically.
We're a week and a half past Tisha B'Av when we have the annual reading of Lamentations.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. So I happen to have discovered a really a rare, or at least unknown to me, cantata written by Elie Wiesel called Amin. Have you seen this?
I have heard of it. I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, it's like a post-Holocaust retelling of a midrash on Lamentations. And so that set me down the Lamentations rabbit
Interesting.
hole.
I'll find this. I'll look it up.
But of course, you go down that rabbit hole, and then I was like, it's time to reread Job, and it's time to reread Ecclesiastes and all of this. And I had just texted Jennifer during your presentation how much I appreciated your kind of work with the translation there, and problematizing the notion of vanity, and all is vanity, and the kind of idea of more mist-like and ephemerality and transience. I find that really, really compelling. So both in terms of your engagement with Ecclesiastes, but also just sublime, absolutely sublime pieces. So thank you for sharing all of this whole exhibit with us over these last few months, and for being with us today.
I appreciate that. It's a fascinating project you have. Very difficult. Got so many threads of this.
Just
Indeed.
a small topic, suffering.
Yeah.
Easy to take on. That maybe is vanity. I don't know.
Yeah, it's mist-like.
Mist-like, yeah, your project is mist-like. That's good.
Yeah.
Perspective.
Yeah. But
Debra, I wonder if you would mind, unless there's Cheryl or Jen have anything they want to say, or questions or comments Or feel free to.
I do, but I can go after you, Jennifer.
Go ahead. Go ahead. It's mine's maybe more of a concluding kind of thing. So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Deborah. I am delighted by this project so much. And I have not gotten a chance to encounter it yet in person, so I'm really hoping that I will be able to on campus before the semester starts. But I think what is captivating most to me is your depiction of Hevel with the mist and some of the ways that it strikes me that in your depictions throughout, the mist offers up this sort of unifying thread in the book in a way that's just not tangible visually, right? As you're working your way through the book. And I think what I noticed most and what you drew out from the rich imagery of the book is the way that thinking of Hevel, translating Hevel as mist, really fits in really beautifully with all of the natural and kind of cyclical earth imagery that
Nice.
Kohelet uses.
I hadn't thought of that. That's nice.
Yeah, it feels really like those work together in a way that your depiction, I was sort of encountering this sense of unity in the book that I have never encountered in reading through it. And so I just wonder.
You need to fix that translation and understand Hevel literally for the book to hang together. And
Yes.
most of the so much of the scholarship, I can't think of anything before Menachem's take on this.
When did he write that
I kept
article?
getting lost. What's that?
When did he write that article?
That article about 20 years ago, something like that. But he hadn't worked the whole thing out.
Okay.
He had the nugget of it, but it was just enough for me to see that something was there. And so I called him and said, all right, we're going to be doing this. We're doing this together. And he thought I was crazy. And it was a high degree of chutzpah on my part too. But you know, and it was several years before each of our desks was cleared and we got to it. But he developed this concept. He had the nugget of it. But then in going through the text, carefully line by line, he fleshed it out wonderfully. And that's what's in the commentaries for each chapter. And we spoke about each chapter before I started working on it, before I started working out ideas for the paintings. And so it came together really wonderfully. But yeah, you have to understand the word in that context. It doesn't make sense, and even rhetorically, it's nonsense to stick with the metaphorical reading of it. If everything is vain, okay, fine. Why bother going any further? You've said it.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I've even, I think I think I've encouraged students to play around with some of those different possible interpretations between breath or breathiness, or even right, or futility at times, and mist, vapor, or even just fleetingness.
Right.
But I think again the unity that the mist provides in your visual midrash is just even more striking. But I think the question I'm getting to is I'm curious.
Yeah.
Please.
No, I was just going to say, you bring up Alter's translation of breath, or merest breath, and it's beautiful, but it's not big enough because breath ties it to the human body, right? And Kohelet is talking about everything we do outside of our bodies. It's our palaces, it's our grand designs, it's our rule, it's everything we do. And so Alters is wonderful, but it doesn't go far enough. And that's why sticking to absolute literality here really works the best. And I'm glad you find that unifying. I meant it that way. Because because that just pervades the whole book
Mhm.
in that sense. So, yeah, sorry I interrupted.
No, thank you. And I'm curious. So the connection between breath and the human, you're saying that's not enough because it can't quite get at the ephemeral nature of what
Everything
Kohelet
we do,
is.
yeah, of
Yeah.
everything. And he's talking about all human endeavor,
Yeah,
not just we have short lives.
that's great. Gosh, I really think that we need to have you come talk to our students. So maybe we can be in touch
There will be an
further.
opportunity for that. So.
Mhm. But my sort of simple question is goes back to what you mentioned before at the very beginning when you began talking, was that when you were in conversation with Menachem and he, you sort of he said, well, I don't know how you're going to visualize this. And you said something like, well, I already know, or I already have an idea. How what sort of pieces or experiences or translations helped you begin to visualize how you were going to illuminate
But
Kohelet?
there's always an element of serendipity in this. So what I told Menachem, I didn't have the idea yet when I was first talking, when I was busy convincing him to do this. But I just said, look, this is what I do. I'll come up with, I'll do it. Just, that's my business. And he had faith because he knew my previous work and whatever, and that was fine. One runs across the palace metaphor constantly in Midrash relating to heaven. And I knew that, so it was never very far from my head. And I don't even remember the moment, but at one point it hit me that, oh, this great, I love medieval Spanish Jewish poetry and work with it all the time in lots of my commissions and so on and so forth. And it probably just hit me one day that, oh, the Alhambra is the palace. And then my husband and I made a trip just to Andalusia just about the time I was starting this, and and I poked around the Alhambra very carefully, and oh yeah, okay, this is the right way of doing it. And once I had that sort of central metaphor, everything fell into place. Everything fell into place. My first book was an illuminated manuscript of the Song of Songs, and I was futzing around with different ideas for some years, and not really getting very far with it. And then walking on the beach, we were living in San Diego at the time, walking on the beach with my husband. This goes back, probably 30 odd years. I hit on, just it came to me to treat the Song of Songs as the love poem, or as a series of daydreams between a young couple within a walled garden. It just came to me like that. And again, everything fell into place. So these little moments of serendipity can offer a lot. So, but yeah, and the mist runs through it deliberately to unify and always drive home the message that everything is mist. So
it's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I wonder if, by way of conclusion, Deborah, you could say a couple of words about the project you're working on right now and what we can stay tuned for.
Okay, sure. Now we're getting into my current obsessions. So I have two projects. Two projects that I'm working on now. I'm painting now. I just started sketching out one painting, or drawing out one painting earlier this morning. And there's one that I'm researching and hoping to start in the next couple of months. the current ones are, I'm working with Susan Gillingham, who's a scholar of Psalms at Oxford. She did a magnificent, really magnificent 3-volume reception history of Psalms. And we were on each other's review panels at the SBL. When Jennifer chaired our Kohelet session, and we'd gotten to know each other. She'd used some of my work on the Psalms in her reception history, and the day after our sessions, we went for lunch, and she asked me whether I would work with her on an interreligious dialogue version of Psalms. So that's what we're doing. We're working with Psalms of creation, and from a Jewish point of view and a Christian point of view. The challenge for me in doing the illuminations is that I'm choosing to work with imagery that needs to work equally well within both religious traditions, even if it means entirely different things. And that's really the heart of the project. It's to show that Rabbi Jonathan Sacks had a wonderful title in one of his books called "The Dignity of Difference," and that's what we're getting at here. That there can be two interpretations. We share this body of text. There can be two interpretations that are entirely different and even mutually exclusive, but we can each hold on to them. They each have their own dignity. So in the graphic design, when I have the Jewish and the Christian commentary, I'm not putting one above the other. They're going to be in side-by-side columns. That they're each of equal weight and dignity. And we're having a marvelous time with this. So I think I'm about a quarter of the way through, and these are coming out wonderfully. The second project, I'm working with a Muslim, he's actually Sufi, artist he's from an Indian family, born in Pakistan, but from an Indian family, who's been living in Germany for 50 odd years. And we're working together on a version on the ethics expressed in the Abraham story from the two different points of view. So we're going to have we've chosen a set of topics to work with, and we're going to have facing illuminations that show these ideas from the two different points of view. As a way of showing that we can have different ideas, and they need to coexist, and we need to understand each other. The third project, and so I'm also painting that now. The third project is Menachem and I are again going to be working together on Esther contrasted with Ezra and Nehemiah, which sounds a bit absurd, and I have several scholar friends yelling at me that this can't be done. But the idea is not to look at the biblical scholarship here, it's to look at political philosophy expressed in each. In Esther, in Esther, the day is won by humans working human politics. The rabbis infer God into the scene, but it's not in the text. It's a matter of Mordecai and Esther working the politics of the Persian court. Compare that to Ezra and Nehemiah. Everything they do is based on prophecy. It's Jeremiah. You can bring Isaiah into it. It's the last line of Chronicles. It's in particular Haggai and the first 7 chapters of Zechariah. These are the prophecies about the need to build and the moment to start building the second temple. And it's all about realizing a prophecy and creating a purity within the nation, based on and rebuilding the temple in line with prophecy, and ignoring the politics on the ground. And there's disaster. There's one trial and tribulation after another. And so what we're doing is contrasting those 2 points of view about public policy, if you will, based on human action or prophecy. And Menachem has a larger idea that he's been working with for some years about trying to eliminate messianic, or the importance of taking messianic thought out of civil politics and civil governance, and which, you know, he's just outside of Tel Aviv. This is a big deal in Israeli politics, as it can be here.
Yes. Right.
Oh, sorry, I'm in Washington.
Right.
So these are the current projects. But I'm studying for the last one. I'm reading hysterically for it now. So I'm ready to get moving, hopefully soon. That's where we are.
Yeah, that's a lot. Very full, robust plate of projects for you. And I can certainly put you, Jen, and Debra in touch for, you know, maybe coming to speak to a class.
I'd love that.
And yeah, and we'll look forward to seeing these projects as they develop and so on. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you. And
This is great
like my
fun.
colleague said, we're been really grateful to have the work in the gallery at United. And I have the book out, you know, on display as well, and on a pedestal so people can.
Thank you. And as Jennifer pointed out, there is a discount code for it on the book's webpage in my website.
Yeah, that's right. Important detail. So we're at time here for lunch, and I know some folks had to log off for other meetings, but I know they would, and already in the chat express their gratitude. So thanks so much for
Thank you.
today, Debra.
An honor.
Soon.
Be well. Bye.
Thank you. So good to meet you.
Bye.